And we'll call to order Longmont Housing and Human Service Advisory Board Thursday, April 13, 2023 at 7 p.m. Is there any public invited to be heard?
No.
No. Okay. Minutes from March 9th regular meeting. I'll entertain a motion to approve. So moved. Can I get a second?
I second.
Thanks, Crystal. All in favor? Raise your hand or say hey or.
I was absent, so I don't think I can vote.
Last week, so yeah.
Kim abstaining, and we got a hand up from Crystal. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you.
Item 4 is the CDBG home and AHF funding cycle information. Molly and Deb, it looks like Molly, you are here. You want to share your screen or just go ahead and talk?
I think it's just Deb.
Deb.
Yes, I will. Let me pull it up. Find it. I didn't know I was right out of the gate. I'm so impressed. Thank you. Where'd you guys go? Oh, here we go. Okay. All right, so I have popped on this meeting before. I don't know that I've ever presented to you folks, but I'm Deb Calise, the Housing Investment Manager that works with Molly in the Housing and Community Investment Division. And so we did open up our funding cycle. So I just wanted to give you guys a very quick report on that. So it opened on March 30th. This year, we did break it into two sections, having a letter of intent due first off, and gave them until April 10th to submit that. We did this because a lot of the projects and programs, for those of you that have been around a while, it can be pretty involved to apply for. And if they're not for things that are going to be eligible anyway, we kind of want to know that and save them a little heartache and filling out everything and dragging out everything. So that's why we chose to do that this time. So this was the notice or the information that went out in the notice. We are using a new system, Neighborly. It was acquired last year for the department. And so people are kind of getting used to that, including us. Already have a long list of things to change for next time, but that's how that is working. Folks can come in, create an account, apply for whatever types of projects they're interested in. We had acquisition, housing investment, community investment, and public services. It just kind of gives a description. Each one just sort of gives a description of kind of the things that would be a good fit for them. And again, we'll probably be polishing them up, and also includes the timeline of when they would come to present to you folks to get your impressions and recommendations. So that's the sort of thing that we walk them through to begin with. These are the application choices I just told you about. We are looking at multiple funding sources. This year we do have home funds where we get the home funds every third year through the consortium. And the consortium is City of Boulder and Broomfield, City and County of Broomfield, and Longmont. And so it rotates between those three. So this year is our year, and we'll probably receive about, since I gave the announcement, we got a more specific number of about 754,000 what we'll be giving out this year. These are the LOIs that were submitted by the deadline. Habitat for Humanity has another project they'd like to get going. So it's one we hadn't heard of yet. So they've asked for 315,000. Longmont Housing Authority for the Village Place rehab that I'm sure you all know about. They have asked for 500,000. And they would be a great candidate for CDBG dollars because they're already jumping through all of the federal funding hoops. So you may see something about that later. Thistle came to the table. They have some rehab that they'd like to do at their Kinbart property. And my understanding is it's quite old, so that makes a lot of sense. 350,000 is what they've requested for. Brickwell is a development organization. They are working with a local landowner that to build a 100% affordable housing residential development off of 3rd and Atwood. And so they've asked for a little over $1 million in soft cost gap funding. In Between has asked for 2 different projects that they've got going. They did get awarded through the consortium, the home art funds in the amount of 1.2 million. And they are asking for more money towards that same project. They were donated land from a church and they want to build 11 sort of transitional housing units for folks that were formerly homeless. So they've asked for $904,000 for that. In Between also has another property here in town on Terry Street that has some roofing concerns. So they have asked for $65,000 toward that. Penrose is the development company that Longmont Housing Authority is working with on the Homes on Hover project, which I know folks have heard about. So they are hoping to get 1.8 million towards that project. Public services, we only got 1 application for public services, and that was the Boulder County Housing Counseling Program that City of Longmont has typically funded. We do refer our down payment assistance program applicants to the housing counseling program. It is a free service for anyone that wants to learn more about their finances, managing their finances, what it takes to buy a house, stay in a house, that sort of thing. So it's a great way that we can fund a program that we also refer people to. So any questions on any of those? We don't gather a ton of detail yet, so they're working on the detail now. So for things like the rehabs, I'm not entirely sure exactly what they want to be working on unless they mentioned it in their application so far.
Deb, what is the general timeline and process for reviewing and awarding these applications?
Yep, so they will have until May 1st to complete the more comprehensive applications. And then I think I need to have my packet ready for you folks to review. The meeting with you is, I believe, May 11th, and I think I have to have my packet ready by May 5th. So there's a fairly quick turnaround. But throughout this whole month, while they're working on their applications, we'll be talking with them, discussing things, answering questions. So we'll become familiar with them. 5 days doesn't seem like very long, but it's a pretty good amount of time because we'll be familiarizing ourselves with all of these to give you folks a good comprehensive idea of what they're asking for and what they want to do. And then we will also be working on sort of our budget scenarios, right? So depending upon what is funded and what level it's funded and with what fund it's funded with, we'll be able to kind of lay that out as well. Right now, even with all of these requests, what we're expecting for the Affordable Housing Fund this year, we would still have a couple $1 million left in that fund for what we're expecting from the fee and lieu's to come in. The fee and lieu's, that program was first established in 2018, and just in the last quarter of last year, the developments that weren't grandfathered in before that time are starting to hit, and the COs are starting to come, and so we're starting to get a bit of a windfall from that. So whether or not we do recommend funding these requests fully or with what, or the request amounts may change by the time they get to you folks, because sometimes that happens as we sort of answer some questions and get a little bit more specific about what they're asking for. Great question. So yeah, they've got their full applications are open because all the projects are eligible for the funding. And then we'll be back with you guys on the 11th they'll be invited to come and give their pitch for their project or their program. So it's also very possible that some of them drop out in that time frame. Just kind of lots of things can happen in a month. So and a lot of the requests outside of the rehabs, the requests for funding of new developments is oftentimes contingent upon receiving other funding like tax credits and things like that. So, things can change. Any other questions? Well, thank you for your time, folks. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Deb.
Yeah.
Actually, it made more sense if I do it from there, because if I can borrow this.
Yeah, thank you, Alberto. Okay, next up is Alberto with the home study report.
And before I do that, I did talk to Graham about, I'd like to change the agenda a little bit. Like just switch 8 and 7 and make 7 right before the announcements. Just because I'd like to have more time for that conversation. So we'll try and get through the discussion about the applications first. And then we'll go into the human services discussion that Christina and I have worked together to create. I just think it would be great to make sure that we have plenty of time for that conversation. So if that sounds amenable, I'll go ahead and go forward with the. How do I get to the?
On the bottom.
I'm gonna need that. Yeah. I'm gonna need this so I can get to the. I need to get to the what's it called? The presentation so I can share it.
PowerPoint. So if you want to minimize this a little bit.
Oh,
It
come
should be
on.
open already, but they're on the bottom. There you go.
There you go. Let's do
The first one.
year end reportism. All right, slideshow. The beginning, and then I want to go back to this and share screen. All right. Can everybody see the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm gonna go through the 2022 year-end report from Homesteady. There's been some interesting changes. I'm going to show you some different data, talk about some of the things that we are learning and trends that we are seeing. And then if you all have any questions, we can get to that. So let me start a little bit of background first. So this program really came out of the first human services needs assessment that we did in 2017 that demonstrated that housing stability or the lack thereof was one of the biggest needs that our Longmont residents were demonstrating. And so in 2018, or in late 2017, we did a request for proposals. We awarded $200,000 to the Art Center to run this program. And basically this program does a couple of things. It provides some funds for a dedicated case manager to clients that are in the program. And then it also provides $120,000 in funds for direct financial assistance to families to help them maintain their housing. And it also has some funds in there for landlord incentives. Those haven't been used a lot, and we transferred them either back into direct financial assistance or to cover. We also wanted to do some evaluation. So we're helping cover a SurveyMonkey subscription and evaluate to do some of that evaluation piece. And so we're going to talk about all those things here in a second. So I wanted to compare 2021. Can I hide this?
Which part? The app store. I think on the bottom there.
All right, well, I'll just keep going. So I wanted to compare 2021 data to 2022. In 2021, the Art Center served 53 clients. 14 of them were able to reach their goal, the goal of having 1 month in savings to cover the rent. So they'll save the entire amount for 1 month's rent, and 36 went through those financial skill classes, which we apparently fund partly through CBDG, right? So nothing, close the dock.
There we go.
There we go. As you can see, they reported that no participant lost their housing during the program. So when they exited the program usually lasts about 3 months. We try and get them back on their feet. No one lost their housing at that time. And 5 continue to use this is 2021 data. 5 continue to use to access our center services. And I think and then 2 moved to other cities that were more affordable, and 1 moved out of state to find more affordable housing or other reasons. So here's how they spent the funding in 2020 and 2021. And I put this up for a reason, and I'll show you here in a second. So in 2021, they did not even spend the entire amount of their what was allotted for the direct financial assistance. They only spent 72% of that amount. Even though the vast majority was spent in rent, there was some funding for utilities, deposit. I think the other was we allowed them to pay property taxes for is that someone here? Yeah. Oh, give us a second. We're good. Okay. I think we allowed them to pay some property taxes for a person to keep their trailer home, their mobile home. So that's what was spent in 2021. And like I said, I put that there for a reason, but I want to show you. Oh, Shakira. Hey, Shakira.
Hey, there.
Yes. In 2022, they served 59 families, and they had 17 reach the goal, the 1 month rent goal of saving, and 53. So quite a bit of an increase in folks taking the financial courses. But they also had more people having to move out of their home by the time the end of the program compared to 2021, when no one left or was unhoused at the program, other than moving to a more affordable place, whether it be another city or another state. And I will say that some of this is microcosms of what we've heard, of trends that we have heard. Folks moving out to avoid eviction, that happens quite a bit. They're going to get evicted, but to avoid that, because once an eviction gets on your record, it's much harder to find a place to live. Of course, family moving out. Landlords selling their home due to the housing market is just much more lucrative to sell the home than keep renting it out. And of course, people moving out to another state or moving to another city, Colorado, for a more affordable place to live. So, and then here, so they have 120,000. They spent 148,000. Of course, as you can see, they've had savings from previous years, so they had the reserves. Very little in utilities and deposit, because there have been other programs to help cover that. But the rent amount was, basically 40,000 more in 2022 than it was in 2021. And the trend that we're hearing is that more people are coming to the program owing more rent, more months. They're in arrears more months than they usually have been, and of course the rent is also going higher. So that's when I meet with them on a monthly basis. Those are the trends that we're hearing. Part of the issue is the ERAP program has come to an end, and the ERAP was the Emergency Rental Assistance Program that was federally funded, and folks weren't ready for the end of that, and so they've been caught in this difficult situation that they hadn't been planning for the end of it. So they've been getting rental assistance for up to, I forget how many months, quite a bit of months that they have not had to pay rent because ERAP was paying for it, and they hadn't prepared for the end of that program, and then having to now be responsible for their own rent. And so they've come they came to Home City for that help. So that is something that we're hearing, that they're just coming, that there's more folks coming, more months in arrear, higher rents makes it harder. In 2022, here's the family structure data. The kind of folks, it's kind of divided pretty evenly between single adults, single parents, and 2 adults with children in the home. Right, so that's a pretty even split between those 3 family structures that are represented in the program. So part of the funding is we cover this survey data for them. They do incentives to get people to respond to these surveys. And while a lot of folks respond to the immediate survey, I really am interested in that longitudinal data. So they sent out 2-year data. They didn't really get money responses from the 2-year data, but they did get some good responses from the 6 months. So these are surveys that are sent 6 months after they've exited the program. And I have some interesting data to share with the board. So one, the one question talks about covers whether they're still in the house. So 91% of the folks that responded were still housed in that home. Again, that to me speaks to the efficacy of the program. If we can get folks stabilized, get them, help them out just to get them back on their feet. So this program is really meant for folks that are working, that have access to income, that may have a slight hiccup, whether it be a medical condition or temporary loss of job. But really, it's meant for folks that can cover their rent if they get a little help. And so this speaks to its efficacy that 6 months later, 91% of the folks that responded are still housed. Then we asked them what their confidence level is to maintain that housing in that address. 1 being the lowest and 5 being the highest. And again, 4 and 5 make up the vast majority, right? That they feel confident that they can remain housed at that address where they are. 27% were kind of in the middle, and then there was no 0s or 1s, or no 1s or 2s. Then we asked them about how they are. Did the program prepare them financially, or give them the financial tools they need to be prepared for any challenges in the future? And 64% said yeah, they feel pretty prepared, but we do have some folks that answered no, they did the answer to 2, we're not necessarily prepared, or they answered a 3, saying, assuming that it's kind of neutral. But overall, people feel prepared because of the program to face future financial challenges. But this is the slide that I really wanted to show and have a discussion with. So I went back and I looked at the last 4 years of homesteading data, and in particular, because we're just at the end of the first quarter, I only took first quarter numbers. I could come back with yearly numbers, but of course you wouldn't have 2023 numbers. But 2023 is I think it's important to share because it's such an increase. So at the end of the first quarter of 2020, homesteading had spent about $15,000 in rent, utilities, deposits, whatever. And as you can see, that blue line represents the trend. In 2023, I just saw the report for March a couple of days ago. They had spent $36,000 already in rent, and most of it was rent that they have been helping with. And as you can see, the number of clients at the end of the first quarter, it's gone up. Even when you compare 2022 to 2023, it's a little bit less, but the spending is more. And again, going back to that fact that people are further in arrears, so the AR Center has to pay more money for those rents. That's a concerning trend that we're seeing. So I just wanted to share that with you all and answer any questions I can about the homesteading program that you all may have at this point. I'll stop sharing so we can see each other.
I I guess I'm not as familiar with the home study program, and so I'm assuming that this is funding that was provided direct financial assistance to folks needing rent, utilities, etc. Is that correct?
So sorry, Chris, like I couldn't hear your question completely. Could you repeat that, please? You kind of broke
So
up a
I'm
little
just
bit.
trying to get a better understanding. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, right now, yes.
Okay. Just trying to get a better understanding of the home study program. So this is, I'm assuming direct financial assistance that was or like funding that was provided to the R Center to provide community members direct financial assistance for things such as rent, utilities, and other basic needs. Is that what it is?
Right, with the express outcome of keeping them housed in their current. So for example, if you already have your eviction notice, your 10-day or 3-day notice, then you wouldn't qualify for homesteading. These are for folks that are housed currently and find themselves in a situation where they need help to cover rent or utilities or whatever, or to find deposit for a more affordable place. And they're working or they have some sort of income that they will be able to continue to be self-sustainable after the program. So for example, it's not as deep of a program as the county's housing stability HSP program. That program I think is like it has more, it serves a little bit deeper than we do, and it can work with a wider variety of families. But it's also more money that the county puts in, right? So we put in $200,000 into that program. But yeah, that's exactly right, Chris.
And is this a one-time assistance, like for a family, like for a month of rent, or it's like one lump sum of either arrears?
They work with them, Chris. Like when I talk to the case manager, for some folks they just need partial help, so they'll just pay partial months for a little bit longer. For some folks, they do take care of arrears. So it's really a case-by-case situation.
And who makes the rules around families that are eligible for this funding? Is it the R Center? Is it Human well?
So we have some basic, we put some parameters around it, but then the R Center does have their own. So for example, our parameters that we put in the contract were, we want it to be for families that can sustain the help, right? So we want to make sure that it's for a family that can, or individual that can continue that can get over whatever temporary hiccup they have and continue to pay their rent after the program's over. Because we know it's not a sustainable solution. It's really a temporary assistance. And then, the R Center can have their own rules that they put onto the program. We just kind of put the swim lanes, and then it's their program. We just gave them the general boundaries of where we want them to work.
Would there be a way that I could review some of those like guidelines, like the parameters in which we set for this funding, just so I can look at it and get a better understanding for it?
Yeah, I can send you the contract.
Okay. And then you said families who receive a demand are not eligible for this funding. Is that what I heard?
Correct.
Okay. Because, I think of a demand like right now, if you're, 5 days late on rent, landlords are issuing demands just for that month of rent. And so kind of doing the work that I do on a daily basis and reviewing households, so on and so forth, I see families who are able to pay their rent, but maybe a car repair came up, or, some expense threw their budget off. Therefore, it caused them to fall short that month's rent. And so if they end up getting a demand, would the R Center consider, or is that an absolute off the table?
Right, and they have other resources. This is not the only resource they have to help with that situation. This is a resource, not the only resource they have to cover those type of situations. Mm-hmm. So I want to make that clear. We're just one program of many that they count, that they look to cover assistance.
And when you take a look at that, Crystal, I'd be interested in kind of hearing some of your thoughts about that, just as we're, you know, as I'm new to my position and just kind of looking at, you know, some of the contracts that we have, how we're, and we'll talk about this a little more, just the, some of the questions that I've had around allocation of funding. You know, I've had the conversation with Heriberto that I don't want to be that new person that just steps in and changes things for the sake of changing things. But if it makes sense to look at modifying things, at doing things differently that we have control over, in kind of how we administer contracts, that kind of stuff. Yeah, please share that information and we can start to look at how we might do that. I'll also be meeting with you know, nonprofits and getting their ideas, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, but I would be interested in just hearing.
I can send you that contract tomorrow, Crystal, and you can take a look at it. And if I find other information, I'll send that as well.
Yeah, and if anybody else is interested in looking at that as well, yeah, just let us know. We'd be happy to share that information.
Thank you. So Aliberto, did you say that they spent the full amount of funding that we provided them with, or I guess I missed that part.
So in 2021, they spent 72%. In 2022, they overspent. They spent 148,000. So over the years, I don't know exactly every year. I go back and ask, but they have had some reserves. They haven't always spent it, and but they're going to burn through that pretty quickly, just because of just the high costs that are seeing now. So luckily they did have those reserves, but yeah, they overspent by 28,000 in 2022.
Yeah, and that's kind of some of the trends that we're seeing too, is the financial assistance that's requested keeps going up, and with the drop off from ERAP, you know, ERAP was paying everybody's rent, and then out of nowhere they stopped, and the participants that thought that their rent was going to at least get paid for the last round, they got like half of the assistance, which they racked up like 4 to 6 months, and then, you know, being on a fixed income, they were thinking, well, they were going to get assisted, and then now they're stuck with these large balances. So I'm definitely seeing those trends where I'm at as well.
Yeah. Yeah, part of the challenge of ERAP was that there was no case management associated with it. So people were just getting the, and so there was no work done around, hey, this is not forever. You know, we got to get ready for it. So that was part of the challenge of ERAP, is it didn't really come with any case management. It was just direct payments of rent. So folks didn't have that assistance to get ready for it.
Any other questions about homesteading? Cool, thank you, Heriberto.
All right.
I think we'll move on to item 6, site visit report on Blue Sky Bridge. Christina and Heriberto, do you want to report on the desk end?
Christina, do you want to start this being your first? Love to get your thoughts on your first site visit.
You know, it was very, very informative. You know, in my previous life, with working with children, youth, and families, have worked with Blue Sky Bridge for years. So it was interesting to hear from them kind of from a different perspective, from a different level. You know, I think they, like many other agencies, have just, you know, through this pandemic, and with the changes in our economy, really talked about just some of the areas that they're struggling. But I think in general, you know, the work that they're doing is really valuable work, and really good work. So it was nice to hear that as well. You know, I think if you want to talk about some of the changes or some of the clarifications that they made as far as you know, their policies, you can talk about that, Eliberto. I know that they're going to work on, they are working on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and making their board a bit more diverse. And so that was something that we asked about. So
And I can speak to that. So it's interesting because they're an agency, if I remember right, that they did well after about 2 or 3 years ago, we talked to them, then they got some diverse
Yeah.
board members, and then they lost diverse board members. So now they're back to having no diverse board members on their board. And I get that, you know, people come and go, and it's a challenge to keep people, and you know, they do want to work better, and they need to be more accountable. They need to continue to work on that. I think one of the things that we walked away from is toward the end, they talked about their concern is how they have a federal grant, Graham and Christina, that they're going to lose. And I think they're concerned about that because it's a significant grant. And yet, like every other nonprofit, they've had to increase salaries. They've had to trying to stay competitive to keep staff. And so Gina was talking about this huge financial gap that they see coming in the next couple of years, and it's going to be tight. So that was an interesting conversation. But as far as their services, again, I think to Christina's point, they talked about, you know, they've done some great upgrades, and they're still doing upgrades to their site. It's very family friendly. It's very safe.
Right.
They want their clients to have is a super traumatic, horrible experience they're going through. So they try and make it as comfortable as they possibly can, knowing that it's just a horrible situation all around. So
yeah, they're very, very trauma informed in their practice, just very thoughtful in how every detail of everything is set up. So I was very impressed with that.
Yeah, so I'll supplement my end of the site visit. For those who don't know, Blue Sky Bridge provides counseling, forensic interview, education and support, primarily around childhood sexual abuse. Their average age of child is 8. And they provide these forensic interviews so that the child only has to report the incident once, and it can be recorded, and then they can have proper advocates in court and don't have to be re-traumatized by retelling the story. Then they supplement with therapy resources and support for the non-offending caretakers that can just help them through the process. They have a backlog of needed kids. There's just a shortage of the therapists that are trained in this that can provide this service, so they're struggling with that. And they are, like Alberto said, losing what's called a VOCA federal funding, which is creating a $160,000 shortfall in the next 2 years. So they are trying to increase some of their funding sources, in particular what they call the movable feast is a primary source of fundraising, and they're going to try to move. It typically happens in Boulder, and they're going to try to recreate that in Longmont. And they do, for their intervention services and the therapy services, 42% of the people they serve are Longmont residents, even though their office is in Boulder. So it's almost half. Education wise, where they go into school to educate students on body safety and having trusted people that they can speak to about these things. You know, they've traditionally done it in Longmont and Boulder, but I guess about 2 years ago, the St. Vrain Valley School Board decided to make it a opt-in for this education, whereas in the city of Boulder, it's required to have this education. And so that decision by the St. Vrain School Board basically cut the legs out from under the program, where their ability to educate in the schools in Longmont is substantially hindered, and they're basically not doing it because, you know, the child has to get this form filled out by the parent to participate. And certainly if you're a child that is being victimized, you're likely not going to be able to get this form signed. So that Gina mentioned, that was a source of you know, she was not really happy with that. So if you're looking for a way to support them in Longmont, that could be a really interesting way to try to push that with the school board.
And as a follow-up, Graham, I did want to let you know and let the rest of the board know that they did meet with the Children, Youth and Families team to brainstorm how they might do some of that outreach outside of the school with some of the populations that we have, namely the council members book club and some of the early childhood work that we do. So hopefully that will make an impact, but we did make that connection.
Awesome. Let's see what else. I think that was the most of what I had. Oh, I guess they did make a request that the city look into this requirement for a wet signature on contracts, kind of a small thing, but it would make their lives easier if they didn't have to. They said Longmont's the only folks that require it. So I don't know if staff was gonna look into that with the law department or not, but we haven't. Cool.
Yes, the city clerk's office is working on that.
Awesome.
They just need a little bit more. They're hoping to get maybe another staff member, so the bandwidth they're just not able to do that at that point. This point.
Okay. Cool. So I think that's it for me. Any questions about Blue Sky Bridge site visit?
Really quickly, is there service area all of Boulder County, or is it just the cities of Boulder and Longmont? I'm curious
Yeah,
knowing.
it's all Boulder County.
Okay, great. Thanks.
I'm not sure if they work in Broomfield too. I don't remember if they said that.
I think they do it by school district as well.
Yeah,
That's
they
right.
might do Broomfield as well, because I think
Yeah.
Broomfield.
Yeah.
is the-
They do.
Yeah,
Okay, cool. Next item would be the discussion regarding Housing and Human Services board application.
yeah, so. You know, last year, the city council instituted a new practice where they would like the different boards to interview applicants for the open positions and then provide both the recording of the interviews and a memo to the council sharing what the board recommends. And so we come back to this choice again that we have. Last year, I brought this before the board, and the choice is, and different boards do it different ways. The choice is we can interview the applicants at an established board meeting. So it probably have to be the May board meeting. We should probably make it a pretty long board meeting. Because if we're gonna have presentations from, but that's fine. Or the board can choose to, like we did last year, and I talked to the city clerk and she says, this is fine. The board can give that authority to the chair and vice chair to interview, which we just have to record the interview and provide a memo. And I talked to Christina about it, and when we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, you know, it might be something to think about. Is it could be a little challenging for someone to come to a big group and be interviewed, and it could be helpful to do the interviews more independently. And you know, I would coordinate with Kim and Graham to figure out when we could do it. But either way is fine, and I think the other way of bringing them here is also interesting, so they could see the entire board. I will say that right now, there are 4 applicants for 2 positions. So that's great.
I would like to mention that most of the boards that I've been on and heard how they do it is the board chair or the board choose 2 people to do the interviewing, and they come back and give their selection to the rest of the board. And that's how they've been doing it, instead of bringing the applicants in front of everyone. that's how the other boards are doing it too.
Right, okay.
That I know of. I can't say all of them, but some of the other boards that
I think the rec board said that they brought them all too, because I talked to Jeff once about it, and they just brought the candidates to the whole board and interviewed them there.
Yeah,
So again,
yeah, either or works. So I guess I'm mentioning that because I know that it's being done both ways.
right.
So.
I don't know, Christina, do you have an opinion on that?
You know, we talked about it a little bit, and I think that, you know, oftentimes, interviewing in a big group can be a little intimidating. I think especially if people haven't had that experience. I don't know who the applicants are. But I think that, in the spirit of, you know, making it kind of a welcoming process, that might be something that this board wants to think about, and think about supporting. And I'm glad to hear, Councilmember Yarborough, that other city boards are doing that. And I think that, you know, as a result, we have some good people on our city boards.
So I can tell you that the recruitment periods end the 21st of April. So a couple of weeks
Okay.
it's gonna end. And we need to, interviews need to be held during the month of May. And the council will you will interview on June 17th. And
That's a Saturday.
that's a Saturday, yeah.
I
And
won't be doing it.
you won't be doing it.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the appointments will be made June 20th at a regular council session. So that's the time frame. So I think I guess the only challenge is if we need to bring it back to the board, do we bring it back at the June meeting, hopefully be in time? I just don't know when we have to get you all the memo. I guess I can check with Dawn about that.
Yeah, I would say I would check with Dawn. Couldn't you all, like do a Zoom meeting and,
We could,
you know, just for like 30-minute Zoom meeting?
yeah, we can call a special meeting.
Yeah, to
Right,
say
right.
you all chose.
Caitlin?
Yeah.
My question is, does it have to be brought back to the board?
We didn't do it last time, but
That's, yeah, we didn't do it the last time, but I guess my question is like, you know, if Graham and Kim are doing it, you know, the rest of us, I mean, I don't know, I don't think we're gonna watch the interviews and really be able to offer any meaningful input. And so I'm not sure if it's necessary for it to come back to the board. Or I guess the question is, what is the idea of it coming
we
back?
didn't do it last time, no. We just, you know, Caitlin and Graham met and they made their decisions. I wrote up the memo and gave them the links to the interview. We did record the interviews and then sent it off.
So the whole board didn't vote on,
Wasn't told they
appointments?
had to.
No, it wasn't the whole board.
Yeah.
Just
I don't think you have to.
Yeah, I wasn't told we
Okay.
had to. Yeah. I mean, I can check with Dawn, but I wasn't told we had to. And the board did vote to give Caitlin and Graham that authority. Like we did
okay,
take.
so
a vote
there
for that.
was a formal vote to give them the
Yes.
authority, so then
Yes,
that probably is what covered it. It would be my guess.
The other boards do that too. The board approved who they want to be the ones to make that decision. So
right.
Okay.
And maybe we have to look back at the minutes, but I think it was Caitlin and I in virtue of our role and not our person, so.
Right, it was chair and vice chair.
Just,
The
yeah,
rule, right, that
Yeah.
makes sense.
So is everybody okay with proceeding in that way, and through this round, or are there board members that would like to be a part of the interview process or the deliberation?
Yeah, I think, with my opinion, I think that's okay. I mean, I'm a little like having just two people make the decision as to who's gonna join the board or what their top pick is, being the only interviewers. But then you guys chose me, so I know you're pretty. So, so I trust you'll make a good decision. So I'm comfortable with that. Because I know you guys are pretty versed in diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I'm okay with that this time around.
And
And
my
if you're-
understanding is that city council is ultimately making the
I was
decision.
gonna say, that's exactly right. Ultimately, all we're doing is recommending. It's the city council who gets to pick the board members.
And I do know just generally from the last round, across boards, city council didn't take every recommendation and just rubber stamp it.
So I'm wondering, oh, go ahead, Kim.
I would love to hear from the board what qualities you feel that maybe are underrepresented currently that you would like to prioritize, so that gives me more context so that I'm better representing the wishes of everyone.
Thank you, Kim. That's awesome.
And my question, Kim, is like, do you want to hear that now? Or is that something, if, let's say we voted tonight to say like Graham and Kim should do these interviews and then have people get back to you, by the end of April, since the interviews have to be done in May, with, either questions or suggestions of things to look for?
I think that's a great idea. Not to take up more time with this meeting, but just giving everybody an opportunity to highlight maybe things that they would like us to consider.
And I would ask if I totally like that idea, and if we're gonna do that, send those suggestions and questions to me, just to make sure we don't run afoul of any, if you guys start emailing each other,
Right.
just send them to me, and I can send them to, because if we were to have 3 people interview, then all of a sudden it has to be a posted meeting,
Right.
right?
Well,
Two
and
people
that
fine.
way that can also be included in the memo as to the process that this board went through. So
Yep.
you appointed the chair and the vice chair. Everybody, all board members had the opportunity to give their input as to what qualities, maybe even what questions to ask, and we could lay it out that way.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'd be happy to do that. Just send those thoughts and questions to me. I'll prepare them for Graham and Kim, and then I will coordinate with those applicants in May to do the interviews, if that's what the board wants. And we will need an official vote. So we'll need a motion. Yeah.
I was just gonna move that we approve Graham and Kim as heading up this interview process on their own due to their positions on the board. Is that a sufficient motion?
I think so.
Okay.
Do we need a second?
I second.
All in favor, raise your hand. Any opposed? I think it's all passes. Thank you.
All right.
And next item is human services discussion. Christina, are you running point on this one?
Sure. I think Eliberto can do
Yeah,
run the
I'll manage
PowerPoint.
I'll manage the PowerPoint. Let me just
Awesome.
get-
And add whatever, please
course,
feel free
yeah.
to add as well. So what we
Yes.
wanted to do was take the opportunity to talk about the framework, the process, what we've seen historically with funding, and just kind of the next steps as we move forward in this. And you're going to pull it up.
There it is.
Perfect. Awesome. Okay. All right. So we can go ahead and go to the first slide. So to talk about, and I don't think this is the one that that we made edits to, Eliberto.
Oh, you may be right. Hold on. That's a good point. Actually, okay, so
Shared one.
Let me, we made some more edits. Let me log on. Give me 1 second.
Okay.
If you wanna,
Well, I can just continue to talk about that, and we just made a few edits to the PowerPoint. So really what we wanted to do was briefly talk about the functions of the Human Services Advisory Board. And as we've talked about, really to advise and assist the City Council in understanding what the human services needs are of the Longmont community, and really look at evaluating the services and functions of the city contracted and grant funded housing and human services agencies that we are serving. And so to Crystal's point in our conversation about the Hour Center, I think that's a really good example of one of the functions of this board. Also to the third part of this is to coordinate the funding allocation process for human services funds, CDBG funds, affordable housing funds, and provide that advisory role to City Council on the agencies that you all recommend that receive funding. So the last part of that is to address other issues as City Council asks the board to do so. As far as the framework, you know, the goal is to look at contracting with agencies that serve low to moderate income Longmont residents and work on meeting basic physical, social, economic, and or emotional well-being needs. And so through these funds, they really fund a range of safety net services that strengthen individuals' abilities to stabilize and ultimately thrive. We'll talk a little bit more later about the community human services assessment and an update to that. The funding prioritization, and I'm on page 4.
okay, yeah, so I got it. I'm sharing.
Okay. Yep, perfect. Thank you, Eliberto. And so the go back one. Yep. So the funding recommendations that we have currently are really a result of the 2020 Community Human Service Needs Assessment. And this process is going to be updated towards the end of this year and into 2024. And as you all know, the current prioritization really are around housing stability, food and nutrition, health and well-being, self-sufficiency and resilience, education, and safety and justice. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of the things that we're seeing as we move forward. And again, the ultimate goal is to make those recommendations to City Council for approval. So when we look at the allocation framework, when you look at these percentages, this is really what we strive for, but you know, Eliberto really says it well when he talks about, you know, this is what we strive for, but we really can't control who applies for the funding and how much they ask for. And these are things, as I talked about, that I think we can discuss in the future, and potentially based on what the board directs, look at how we might make changes to this allocation framework in order to meet some different needs that we're seeing. Go ahead and move on. As far as the process, the application is assigned points, agencies' applications, and the hope is that the applications address priority areas, that they address community needs, and they demonstrate sound financial management and operational practices. And then I know that we've talked about the formulaic allocation and how we apply that. We average the scores of the staff, the staff members that read the application and the board application reviews, and then we total the scores and determine the percentages of request to be funded.
Right, I guess what I'll say to this is on that top part, you know, the staff looks at really that third bullet, the sound financial management and operational practice. And the board really is the one that looks at, are they actually addressing a need? Are they aligned with the work that we want to do? And we spent a lot of time when Brian was here creating those goal statements, those outcomes, those activities that we were interested in. And we can, and those are always open for review if the board wants to go back and review them and change them. And the board also is the one who scores to whether they have demonstrated through their evaluation or their scope of work or their activities, whether or not they're having a community impact. That again is in the purview of the board. Staff really just looks at,
The
are they
financial piece.
yeah, are they running their program with financial or sound financial ways, strong management, and the staff also gets to look at, it's not in the board's purview per se, not that the board can't take that into consideration, but it's really the staff that looks at the diversity of staff and board. We get to score that, but we do have a question in there around, and we can always look at that question again around how the programs are trying to address historical inequities through their work. So we all get to look at DEI work within the application, but it's the staff's purview of whether, you know, what percentage their board is made up of people of color or staff, et cetera. So I just wanted to remind folks of that, that's how that works.
When we look at 2023 funding recommendations, we received applications from 48 agencies, 51 programs, and it totaled about $1.8 million. We then conducted agency hearings, reviewed and scored each application according to the weighted criteria, and then allocated that funding. And so we recommended about 1.4 million to fund 46 agencies and 49 programs.
Right.
Okay.
You want, and again, we did change how we do the agency hearings this past year. You know, up until last year, every board member read every application and tried to attend as many of the hearings as possible. This year, we gave you all the opportunity to choose three applications to read. So, and that seemed to, in my mind, that seemed to create more, you know, more deeper engagement with the agencies during the agency hearing, because you could actually take the time to read and formulate questions.
Right. Yeah, I think reading that many applications is a lot, and so I'm glad to hear that change was made. That's a lot of requests for one person to, you know, for every board member to read everyone. So
yeah, it's a lot.
So when we look at allocation by priority area, this is kind of what it shakes out to be. So the majority is education and skill building, followed up by housing stability, or followed up by self-sufficiency and resilience, and you know, that's how they're broken up.
Yeah, and again, I think to go back to what Christina said, you know, the board sets the guidelines. Even though last year we didn't change them, just because again, we're in the midst of transition with leadership. We left the percentages that we wanted, but they've always served two purposes. One is guidelines, not necessarily set in stone, right? So we can't control. But the other purpose they set is they help set what the individual limit was, right? Because we always said the individual limit is 50% of whatever that priority area is. So that's why they're important, even though we rarely, even though safety and justice is about right, but we rarely ever hit the percentages that we want. because we can't control who applies and what they apply for.
I think that, that, you know, that this funding year, it was a big goal that was reached as far as, you know, I know that Karen's goal, Eliberto's goal was to get the funding levels back to 2017 amounts. And that goal was met in 2022. And I think that's amazing. And for the reasons that Eliberto said, he didn't change that for 2023 due to the change in leadership. He just left those the splits the same way. We have some different dynamics that we want to talk about that might change this in the future, and we can talk about that as a group and how to address this as we move forward and look at some data. But this shows a good snapshot of historical funding and how, you know, finally we're at the place where we were in 2017.
Right, and just as a reminder, the reason that we wanted to, so in 2017, the council and Karen together made the decision to split off the human services funding and have basically in half, even though it wasn't set in stone that it'd be in half, to go to homelessness services and homelessness prevention. So for example, I just presented on homesteading, that comes from that slice of that funding from the homelessness side. And so what that meant was that in 2018, our regular nonprofits lost half of the money that they had been receiving, right? Up until 2017, when that decision was made. And so at that time, the amount was $1.1 million or something. But as the general fund has grown, Karen wanted to get back to at least the 2017 amounts.
Numbers, right.
Right, and so that's why this board pushed council or advocated with council to get us up to 3% of the general fund, which happened in 2022. As soon as that happened, we met our goal of continuing funding nonprofit agencies at least at the same amount that we did in 2017. And then again, I didn't change the funding for 2023 because again, leadership transition, I didn't feel that it was my place to change it. I just left it as Karen had it.
So I think when we look at the future, and this is something that I mentioned earlier, what we want to do is engage our local nonprofits on human services needs. We know that we're waiting for the formal human services needs assessment, and that's going to happen end of this year, early 2024. But what we want to do in the meantime is engage our nonprofits and really hear from them about what has worked in this process, what have maybe been some of the pain points, what are some, you know, what's the low-hanging fruit that we might be able to look at making some really thoughtful changes and bringing that those recommendations back to the board. I would like to have some focus groups with nonprofits to just start to have these discussions, and that really is my on my work plan, my goal for this this first year of me being in this position. We also know that from working with our nonprofits, there is large there's been a large jump in increase in family homelessness. So we're seeing more families living in their cars, more families doubled up. The Our Center has talked about never have seen this amount of need before. So I think that's something that we need to really look at, and as a board, you know, bring back that information to you all to have some thoughtful discussion about that and look at how how this program might want to address that. Again, we've talked about reviewing and evaluating the current allocation formula. What does that, what does that look like? How might that need to be changed? And then examine, one of the thoughts that Eliberto and I have talked about is examining if moving larger grants to a reimbursement sort of grant might increase accountability and ultimately provide more resources to allocate. We have some agencies that are funded pretty large grants. And if they were on a allocation or a reimbursement type of grant, would the ask change? What is my question. And so wanted to kind of put that out there and see what some of those thoughts are. And if that ultimately would open up resources to provide more funding for more agencies. So that's kind of what we are thinking, and would be happy to answer any questions or if there are any other ideas that you all may have.
If I may share, Christina, I really like how you said that you're looking to have some focus groups with some of the nonprofit organizations here. Well, I don't know if I think it's some of them are county, right? Not all Longmont. And I would be curious to hear what their belief system, and I don't know if I'm phrasing this right, so let me know if you need me to try to clarify this a little more, but what their belief system is on like poverty and helping those in need. I know like, there are some like beliefs and ideology around like, the more you help, the more you hurt. And there's others who believe, helping and, the time of need can prevent, so much destruction and things happening down the road. And so I would really want to understand like what is their ideology around helping folks, and how that's impacting the work and the organization and the funds that they're providing the community. I don't know how you would word that, but I'm sure that you would make it fancy and get that answer out. Another thing too I want us to really understand is, before COVID, a lot of organizations used to look at families as far as like sustainability and can they maintain their expenses moving forward, and if so, and if they're stable, then let's assist. But right now I think that that's really transitioned to more of just responding. I think with how everything is with inflation and the cost of everything going up, and minimum wage, not being up to par with, or even just wages, I don't think we can really look at some of the assistance that we put out into the community and judge families on, well, is this sustainable moving forward? I think it's more of like a response model right now until things settle down. So, because I see it in the community, someone could be hardworking, working full time, but when you look at all of the expenses that they have to pay, and then because they work, they're not eligible for some of that assistance that's out there, then, they're literally, one emergency, either medical or a sick kid, can absolutely just throw a family off and cause them to become homeless within a matter of months. And if we're looking, if a lot of our funding is focused on like, are they going to be able to maintain, or, I just think that's kind of, as times change, the way we're looking at some of these situations and providing the funding and some of the rules around that funding has to be looked at again as well and change, because we're in much different times. And even with the 2017, I don't know if allocation is the right word, but like the amounts that we were giving, like we're far beyond 2017 today. and everything that's happened with COVID and cost of rent and cost of expenses, utilities, food, childcare, you know, the wages that folks are receiving. So yeah, I would really like to be more part of these conversations, because I'm talking to the families every day and I'm hearing their stories and I'm hearing the trends, and it's, you know, when I first started the position, it used to be, okay, can they maintain this? Are they sustainable? You know, is it sustainable? You know, does their income cover their expenses? And now it's more of just, you know, put out the fire at hand and just hope another one doesn't come up anytime soon.
Perfect. Thank you. And Deanna, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I had 2 points. The first point, I was just going to ask if you are involving board members in the focus groups, and to say that I think probably several of us would like to be involved in that,
Yeah,
if you need the assistance on that.
that
And
would
then
be great. Yeah.
clearly some of us have more personal experience, Crystal, to offer to those, but I still think more hands can be helpful. So I would be willing to
Yeah.
help with that as well. And then my second point was to ask just a little bit of clarification about the last slide on that last page about the reimbursement grants. I just thought that is something I haven't heard. You know, I've been on this board for a while. I don't think I've heard any discussion of reimbursement grants, but maybe it's just something I'm not familiar with. And I thought it sounded like, is it like a loan that we're giving these agencies to? So could you just explain what that is?
No, this kind of came out of and this was, you know, exactly the reason that I wanted to bring this to the board is how some funding has worked. For example, through the county, they have some departments that will say, okay, we will award you $75,000 for XYZ program. And then the payments are to be given to you monthly, quarterly. And what you do is you turn in receipts. So the $75,000 is the allocation for the agency. And then the way that the funds are accessed is by showing receipts, either payroll or other receipts of how the funds are sold or are spent. And so that's in kind of contrast to saying, okay, we're going to write a $75,000 check for this program that you've outlined. Then we sometimes get back, well, we didn't spend it all on this, but we're wondering if we could spend it on this. And my thinking was, okay, if we have more need than we have funds, then I'm wondering if for some of those bigger grants, if it makes sense that we, you know, that the board might consider doing reimbursable grants for those, because then it would help kind of in those budget as agencies are creating their budgets. It's if an agency knows that it's a reimbursable grant, they're really going to hone in on exactly what they need to spend the funds on. And so, you know, I've had experience kind of with both kinds of grants. And so it was an idea. It might open up more resources and maybe something for you all to think about. And we wanted to kind of plant the seed and see what you thought about that. Maybe think about it for a little bit. And as we're going into this next funding cycle, and you all are reading applications and we're looking at kind of what the need is versus the amount of funding that we have, that could be something that you would want to explore. Does that help?
Yeah, that helps clarify a lot. Can I just have one follow-up question too?
Sure.
It sounds like that is an interesting concept that I probably need to put my brain around a little bit more, but it might also result in extra work for staff. So because you're gonna have to review all of that.
Work for staff. It is extra work for staff because you actually have to review, you have to actually match receipts to the contract. And so that is something that Eliberto and I have talked about, and kind of how that would happen. And that's why I'm wondering if it makes sense to do it just for the larger grants. You know, if we look at breaking up grants into different tiers, maybe. So if agencies are getting between, I don't know, 75 and 150,000, I mean, maybe you look at doing it there, kind of outlining it in the application. That way, this set of amounts would be a reimbursable grant. These kind of would fall in line with how we've done grants before. So something to think about.
Thank you.
Caitlin?
Yeah, I find that super interesting, and I'm glad that we're thinking of some other ways of like making the money potentially stretch, or you know, how we administer it. I think that's awesome. One thing that that I know, I think it's the City of Boulder does on theirs that we have not done, but that I think is an interesting one, is that the grant money generally can't be used for general staff expenses or like salaries.
But so no, that's not totally true.
Okay.
They can be used for program staff, but they can't be used for general ops.
Yeah.
Which
Which
we can cover staff salaries for program staff. So for example, if you are doing case management, we can help cover those case managers. But we can't cover your ED or your development director.
All right,
or
so frontline staff, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mention it because I mean, I know we've had some where it's like, okay, you know, and the easiest one is, you know, some of the like medical or dental providers where they're like, oh yes, it's program staff to hire like a nursing assistant because we need nursing assistants to ask these questions. It's maybe a stretch to say that they're program staff when they're going to be when that like administration of that program in their visits is a very small portion of what they're doing. I'm just putting out there that there may be, you know, some other ways that we want to be thinking about, like, sure that we're supporting.
Yeah, that's a great idea. We could tighten up. We could tighten up historically, and I know because I've applied for this grant in the past. Not I manage it now, but I used to apply for it for years. We try and always keep program staff, but it is challenging because you don't know what all your program costs are going to be, right?
Right.
And so those of us that run programs, we budget and we think we know what we're going to spend, but we don't always know exactly what our program budget is going to be. That's why it's called a budget. At the end of the year, we ask them to tell us, they send us we ask them to send their financials, and then we ask a direct financial question saying, hey, did you spend all the money? The answer, most of it that I've read is yes, of course we spend all the money. And because they do, because none of our grants are going to be enough to, cover. We don't give them that much out, so we can't cover a lot of costs. So yeah, of course they always spend their money because we give them $10,000. Yeah, it's a program that costs $3 million. So yeah, I think I like the idea of maybe strengthening those requirements. We want to know exactly what you're going to spend on, or be a little more stringent about that. I think Crystal has her hand up.
Just one quick follow-up comment there is like, my goal there is not for us to, get into micromanaging of, what they're using it for, right? Like it's more of a, wanting to help ensure that, essentially like our money can really work on those programs, and that folks are really thinking about that, and not just like, hi, we need to hire 3 more staff, therefore we need a City of Longmont grant. I don't think most of our partners are doing that. So okay, that's it.
That too may be true. They may need 3 more
That is true.
staff. I
Right.
mean, with the lack of staff. And I
Right.
know running programs myself, everything is so much more expensive. I mean,
Mhm.
transportation to take kids to go somewhere, I mean, has almost tripled in price. Years ago, when we would spend before COVID, $400 to take a whole busload of girls on a college tour, now it's $1,400.
Wow.
So, I mean, you don't know until you get in it, and who's gonna budget $1,400 where you could say, I would say maybe, 800, and you get the quote for 1,400, and all the rest of them are over that. So it's really, I agree with you, Eliberto. You really, as far as running programs, you really don't know. You create the budget, but especially since
Right.
the pandemic, everything had just increased drastically. Yeah.
Crystal?
I was kind of happy you asked that, Caitlin, because I was just gonna ask, like, how do we know what they're spending the money on? And how do we know that that's reaching the people? And so, and even throwing some of these amounts out, like $75,000, working for the organization that I work for, we fly through that.
Yeah, you
right?
guys are
Yeah,
$1 million
absolutely.
agency. Yeah,
And
70
so-
grand is a drop in the bucket for you all.
Yeah, so so I see the need, like the need is out there. And so I know, and this is for a year, right? And I think too, we can't be like stringent on every organization, in that, like, because we don't know what their needs are. And I think that we can be open to, if they say, well, we would really like to use your grant for this purpose, having them be open and really understand that. But I would like to see a lot of this money go to the community, directly to the community, and reach the people, because by the time it trickles down, I don't know. And I don't know the process, and I don't know the organizations, and I'm hoping to get to know more about them. But, it's, the need is so high right now. And if some of that money is going toward paying employees and so on and so forth, which is necessary, and then are we really truly making an impact?
Well, so can I ask a follow-up question to that, Crystal? So when you say going to the community, like, I guess what do you mean by that?
I think like direct assistance for basic needs, housing, rent assistance,
Okay.
like, food, utilities, medical. I mean, everything that everyone needs to just have their
Right,
basic
okay.
needs met. I think that's number one, right? And then you build on that, advancing in your jobs or your skills, then there's that next tier of what folks need, right? But thinking about like basic needs, it's hard because I feel really passionate about it, because I do work for a really huge organization. And when I started working for them, I thought, Longmont's 15 minutes away. What's the disconnect? How can we serve our community the same way that Boulder's serving theirs? And so I'm really trying to understand the process and what our city's doing, what the disconnect is, how could we provide the same type and amounts of assistance to families in need, so that we could meet their needs. And when I say needs, basic needs.
Yeah, that's good to know. I mean, so a lot of our human service agency grants do not go to direct, they don't go to basic needs, because, for example, early childcare, a lot of it goes to pay for early childcare staff, or it goes to help cover for safety and justice. It goes to help cover legal costs for low and moderate income families to access legal. So the money goes to a whole bunch of different things. Not necessarily does it all go to basic needs. A lot of it goes to all sorts of different programs, including some basic needs stuff like homesteading goes to direct needs. But for example, the R Center, really, it goes to pay for a lot of their caseworkers to provide those basic need supports. So yeah, it does go to multiple things.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I feel like across the agencies, it's interesting how different some of the like delivery of like what those funds get used for. You know, and you know, maybe as we do more of the site visits, Crystal, I think that will highlight some of the ways that, you know, that the city's funding has been used. So like dental aid is one of the agencies that we, and part of what they do, like some of it is like overhead costs for providing services in the community that like their federal grants can't cover, or
Right.
outreach with specific communities. There's Eliberto, what is the church that does the like mobile clinics?
Oh, St. Benedict's, right?
Yeah, so
Right.
they go and provide a mobile clinic for folks, and you know, part of what we are providing is actually like the supplies, I think, right, as well as
Yeah, we
maintenance on the vehicle that they take to that mobile clinic. And so it's not like directly to it, but it allows them to provide services directly to folks. In between, provides transitional housing to people based, you know, on a sliding scale, so that they can get up and going. And so, you know, not all of that is direct support of like putting money in the hands of community members, but it's, I think, creating the scaffolding for those support services.
And remember, our in-between contract really covers those case managers that provide the life. So what you were saying, to the life skills to get the better job and do that. So that program, that educational program at the transitional housing, we help cover part of that cost.
Right, right. Yeah, I think it's, you know, the tough part is looking at the whole picture, and looking at kind of what those basic needs are, and having the, you know, the frontline employees there that are going to be able to, you know, support those families and kind of disseminate those funds. And, you know, I think the bottom line is that the need is much greater than the resources that we have. And so how can we best be poised to, you know, leverage what we have to make the most impact? And so I think, yeah, I think, you know, to your point, Deanna, I think those focus groups and having the board involved to hear what agencies are saying, I think it's going to provide, you know, even more understanding, a deeper understanding, and help kind of flesh some of this out and see what changes you all might want to make, or not make any changes at all, and know that, hey, what we're doing is what we need to be doing. So just you know, being in that place and knowing, yeah, that what we're doing is the right thing.
I have a question. So do you think that a lot of organizations, now that that PPP money is gone, is, you know, because I think that helped their financials for the last couple of years for those organizations that received that money. And now, without having that money, not saying they weren't creating their budget in a correct way, but we know that now with inflation on top of all of that and not having that money has also created more of a deficit in a lot of nonprofit organizations too, especially the smaller ones that really don't have those $1 million budgets, you know.
So we've done multiple, through our Funders Collaborative, we did multiple surveys throughout the pandemic. And it continues to be true that staffing is one of the biggest issues. You know, Christina and I actually had a conversation with our ECE provider, early childhood providers, a couple of weeks ago. And the biggest thing that came up was staffing and maintaining staffing.
Yeah, staffing and maintaining staffing. And when you look at what nonprofits' ability is to pay their employees, that's where the disconnect is, right? When you have an early childhood provider that is leaving the industry altogether because they can go to Smucker's and work the night shift and make, sometimes, their salary and plus half of what they're making as an early childhood provider. And that's why we're losing that resource in our community. And so, yeah, I think you're right, Councilmember Yarborough. They're feeling it.
Yeah, I don't think there's any agency that hasn't
Nope.
felt the pain of having to increase salaries because they needed to keep staff. I think, and to be fair, I mean, the city has gone through the same
Oh,
thing.
yeah,
And
Absolutely.
we've had a lot of challenges to keep staff and, recruit staff in critical areas.
Well, council just went to, well, 4 of us went to NLC to Washington DC, and they are pushing a lot of federal dollars for workforce development right now.
Mhm.
So a lot is coming down, the pike for that to help organizations and municipalities with workforce development, because all the municipalities are crying about this because it has hurt them, right?
Mhm.
And not just the municipalities, but corporations and nonprofits. And so there will be money coming out for workforce development. And so hopefully there'll be some grant money for these other small nonprofits who will need that operational funds as well.
Right. And workforce development in critical areas like, the medical field and the, we all feel that when we try to get a doctor's appointment. Like, how hard is it to get a doctor's appointment with your PCP?
Yeah.
So it's, that especially in some really key industries. So yeah, good point.
I just want to add too, I'm thinking, there's a lot of little nonprofits out there, and
Yes.
and how much of a difference do we make giving a little bit each to every little
Right.
nonprofit, is, do we want to start thinking about funding some of the larger ones more? Now, I'm all about supporting the smaller ones, right? But if the larger ones are more established, then our monies are truly meeting the needs of the people versus trying to keep a nonprofit afloat. And so it's going to depend on everyone, right? And all the different organizations, but just something to think about. And then streamlining, one issue that I've seen in the community is, Boulder County is full of resources. Like, this is resource central. But there's not like a one-stop shop, and they're not easily obtained. And so I would like to see more organizations focused on some of those more specific needs for people to say, okay, I need rent assistance, therefore I go to our center. I need utility assistance. Okay, that we have an organization here in the city of Longmont that has access to EOC funds, which our center does, but they don't distribute as much as in my opinion, that they should be tapping into EOC. And then, kind of like the other resources that serve other needs. So
Right.
just kind of thinking about that as well, with my experience as a community member, as someone who's working at a nonprofit, seeing the needs of other community members and just kind of seeing the trends and different things like that. So
That perspective.
That's a great point. And we've had that conversation before. We can have it again. We've talked about, how do we focus our funding? We've had those conversations in the past with past board members. I think that's a great topic to have again. I'm on the Longmont Community Foundation board, and they've had that conversation about, so what's the best, because they give less money than we do, right? In the sense of, so they've thought about, maybe we should give more to the smaller nonprofits, and because the bigger nonprofits have stronger development teams and they can find other places to get bigger money. And so they are focusing not exclusively, but much more on those, helping those smaller nonprofits become more successful.
Christina, we were looking at a slide about the trends in funding over the years, in particular the split between homelessness and human services. And do you have a vision or a notion of where that might change or go in the future?
You know, as I mentioned before, I don't, not specifically. I think that, you know, like I said, as a group, I think it would be important for you all to talk about some of the trends that we are seeing. And it will be really important, you know, for board members to be part of these focus groups to see, you know, what, for example, family homelessness. That's something that is increasing. Are there other issues that, you know, big issues that have happened in our community that are impacting nonprofits that we aren't even thinking about that might inform that as well. And so I don't have any specific numbers as far as, you know, this is where I recommend the board should think about, but I think it's more about listening, getting the information, and then moving forward from there. If that helps.
Yeah, thank you. That's awesome. I really appreciated the high level view and your thoughts and looking at the next year or two. I think it's awesome. And reviewing the allocation formula, I think that's also really interesting and important. I got to admit for myself, it would get pretty complicated toward the end there when we had underfunded or underallocated funds, and then we sort of seemed to haphazardly try to allocate them fairly. And once we got into all those Excel formulas, you lost me for sure. So maybe simplifying that and making it a little more equitable or predictable might be great. Yeah.
Yeah, I admit when I have 6 or 7 different models, it does get confusing.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Okay, we can work on that.
And Eliberto, just to add, I think we missed chatting about some ideas around that. One thing that Christina and others, one thing that I thought about was, you know, we've come up with various funding formulas and we kind of pick cutoffs for those. But I think, you know, I think there are some opportunities to do an analysis of like, how much money are people actually requesting, because we don't know that ahead of time. And so like trying to set a like cutoff before we know how much money they're asking for or like where the scores will end up is really hard. But, you know, anonymizing the data to then say like, oh, the average score is a 75 and, you know, 50% of the scores are between 70 and 80. Right, or something like that. So that kind of gives it like get a better holistic view of what we end up with and what the requests are, to see if we can come up with some ways that are less confusing, maybe with the various models of allocating the funding. So
okay.
We still have 15 minutes. If there are any more questions or comments on this.
I'm gonna send it to you, Brenda, and maybe you can share it out. But EFA just released kind of like a very simple like data, like temperature take of the county as to like what, you know, homelessness is looking like, families who are not getting enough food, you know, how a single person they have to have 2.5 full-time jobs to be able to be, you know, sufficient in, you know, to be able to provide all of the needs. And it's really simple, but it really puts things into perspective without looking at all the data and getting lost in the numbers. So I would actually love to share that with you guys so you can kind of get that temperature as well for the community right now and what that looks like. And then of course, we're going to have that survey come back too with the needs assessment. So I think it's just, you know, good data to have as we start to go into some of these more complicated decisions. And so I'll share that with you, Brenda, and then maybe if you could just share it with everybody else.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay, thanks,
All right.
Christina.
Thank you.
Any other announcements or other business?
I had one more question. I'm sorry. I'm talkative tonight. For board members who are going to be joining the board, I'm just curious, does that impact, because as we start to really look at more diverse board members and, and voices in the community, does that impact their ability to receive services from the city, like through the rehab program, so on and so forth? It doesn't impact that, because I thought I heard something about like a conflict of interest or something with the rehab program that kind of made me ask that question. And so I wasn't sure if it prevents board members from receiving some of those services. If it does,
Question that we could look into, but I don't think so. I mean, at most, I think what it would mean, because for example, Brian was a board member, his agency got money. He just had to recuse himself from any vote that pertained to his organization. So I don't think so, but we could look into it.
Right.
yeah, I think it's good to know, because we're going to be bringing on community members, and if they need help, I don't want that to impact their ability to get those
Right.
services.
That came up in our training. That came up when I did training, and it was categorically like just receiving support through organizations that the city funds is not considered a conflict of interest. It's really if, you personally could benefit, or like you work for an organization, like the money we give doesn't, we aren't determining that it's going to go to community member X. And so like, we want people who have utilized these services.
Mhm.
Yeah, and again, I think at most you just have to recuse yourself from that vote. Like Brian did, he would recuse himself from those votes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I was just going to add in that I indirectly received services from the organizations that we fund as a foster parent. So, and I had raised this before as a concern and everybody was fine with it. So I don't think, obviously, as everybody said, we want those community members on the board. So I think it's only if you work maybe for the organization, right? And then you just recuse yourself, so.
Right. Like you wouldn't be reviewing EFA's application, Crystal. So, and you wouldn't be doing their site visit. So, yep.
Exactly.
Thank you. That was a question that was kind of sitting with me for a while, and I'm like, well,
That's a good question.
I want to make sure folks know what they're, hey, if you serve, have access to this.
It's a good question.
It's a
Yep.
Yeah, and I
trade-off.
think our board training does talk, you when you go to the official board training, there's the training that we do as a housing human services advisory board, and then there's a training that our legal department, that city clerk does, and they go over the conflict of interest as well.
Mhm.
Thank you. That's it for tonight. Thank you.
all right, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
Yeah, seconds, all right.
Second, all in favor? Have a good night, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.
Good meeting. Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Thank
Thanks.
you.